Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning company specialized in project management, production tracking, and the creation of media review platforms for the creative industry. ftrack has recently released 2 new versions of its media review software. Check out ftrack Review for the new interface and even more accessible reviews. You can also try cineSync 5, the brand new version of cineSync, built from the ground up for the most secure, high-quality review sessions out there. You can try both products for free via the link on the description below. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo, how you going?
I'm very good, Ian. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you on Zoom again. Last time we saw each other was actually in person at the FMX conference in Stuttgart, which was awesome, wasn't it?
It was. Like, I can't believe that we actually got to see each other, like, for real. Because we haven't seen each other for years, and it was just amazing to be on a real conference, to actually be with people and to actually have an audience. I was presenting and I actually saw people, and I actually could grow with the crowd and respond to the crowd on the keynotes and the panels I did. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah. Hugo, today we're talking about Matt Reeves' The Batman, but before we jump into that, we always want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Thank you for sponsoring the VFX Notes podcast, and also to our Patreon users. And Hugo, what special thing do our Patreon users get with VFX Notes?
Well, they get they get a treat. They get the podcast 3 days early and completely ad free. They get basically the audio version of the podcast, and they can listen before everyone else, which is great.
Yeah. Well, thank you to everyone who's a Patreon to either Hugo's Desk or the Befores and Afters Patreon. You get to decide if you want to join up to one of those or maybe both. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
We do have quite a few people that are actually supporting both, so thank you so much for that, actually.
Exactly. So, okay. I think Hugo, I have to say this up front for the Batman. We were inspired to do a podcast episode on the film. And here we're actually going to reveal that we're going to focus very much on the Batmobile penguin chase. Yeah. But I think we were inspired in a huge way to do this episode because of Weta FXs presentation at FMX, right? It was just stunning.
Oh my God. This presentation, I know it's not public and only people that bought the ticket at FMX could watch it. I think this was one of the best presentations I've seen in a long time. The way it was, I'm not even going to talk about the stuff that they showed. The production level of the presentation, really well filmed, really well presented. They looked like they were on a cinema. The sound was impeccable, the timing was impeccable. They even had a lot of design on their slides, and they had intermissions and little breaks. The whole thing was just oh my God, this is how you do a presentation. And then of course the stuff that they showed, just made it just made me look at the Batman in a completely different light. I mean, I watched the movie and I kind of liked it, but also didn't like it. I was a bit mixed on it. And the more I see the work done, the more I respect the film. I still, I have a lot of reservations on the film. We'll talk about that in a second. But I still think the work here is inspired and very much, I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, but it's definitely gonna be Oscar nominee worthy kind of thing. It's that level of work, and flawless and invisible, and yeah, shout out to Weta and their entire team. They also put like a credit list of everyone involved at the end, which was great. Shout out to every single one of them. It was a stunning work.
Stunning presentation. Hugo, you mentioned some reservations in there. What are they? What's your overall feeling about this new Batman film? Come on, spill the beans.
Okay. I know I'm going to get hate for this because people, when I posted on Twitter saying that I didn't like it that much and I thought it was okay, people got really mad at me, got really upset at me, like saying that I'm wrong. You know how Twitter is. So I really like Matt Reeves. I really like his work, and I think what he did with Cloverfield, he really completely revolutionized those kind of films, and all of his films, like, you know, everything he's done so far, going from Cloverfield to Planet of the Apes and now the Batman, has been doing some amazing work. You know, and I think, and also like the DOP of this film, you know, Greig Fraser, which we've talked about a lot about him on Dune as well. They are amazing at what they do. But I have a problem with the Batman because I think the film just has a bad pace. I feel the film is way too long. It's 3 hours long. I understand why it had to be that long, but I feel like the pace of it is just too much. It was uncomfortable to watch it on the cinema for that long. It was also very dark and very gritty. There was no humor on it. I'm not saying this should be a comical film. I just feel like it was a little bit too much, and I felt like the film is trying to take homage on Chinatown and on Seven especially. It literally looks like Seven with Batman. I just think it's a bit too much. I think it's too dreary, it's too dark, it's too slow, and too humorless. And I feel the film is a spectacle visually, but it just loses a bit on its tempo, and it loses a bit on the story. I just feel like it could have been a bit faster and get to the point a bit quicker. You know, that's my feeling on it. You know?
I had just such a great time with the film in the cinema, as I often say on this podcast, sitting in a dark cinema watching something that was pretty awesome most of the time. Especially the cinematography and especially the music. I also really enjoyed the tunes in this. I agree that it was too long. There was this whole kind of detective side of it, especially the rat with wings kind of riddle. That's not a spoiler, but it kind of is. That ultimately the way that was resolved seemed kind of obvious in the end.
Yeah.
But a nice kind of fun thing that relates to a website. And, you know, once you kind of get past that, there's amazing action beats, including this Batmobile chase and the flooding sequence, the wing sequence, some of the fight scenes I also really loved. But amongst it was kind of a slightly hokey love story and a slightly unusual detective thing that probably went too long. But as an experience in the cinema, I totally loved it. Totally dug it.
Yeah, no, so, I know what you mean. I've watched the film twice now, and I did enjoyed it better. I enjoyed it better on the second time I watched it, but I still felt it was too long. Man, don't get me wrong. I do feel like I really understand what Matt Reeves is doing here, and I feel like this is the closest we've ever gotten to the comic book. I'm a huge fan of the comic book. When I was young, I used to devour the Batman comic books when I was like 10 years old. Still have a little nice T-shirt here with the Detective Comics. Like I think he was the director that got closest to the source material, because the Batman's comic books is like this. Like, it is a detective story, and it's really slow paced, and then there's some action here and there, but we've never really had that on any other film. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate that he really went much closer to the origin than everyone else. Although I really love Christopher Nolan's attempts, I think now, I mean, this looks more faithful to the original, than anything else, and it really makes both Schumacher's attempts and also, the Batman versus Superman a bit oaky now. When you look at them, they look a bit like weird. So I really respect what they've done here, and I think for me, like, it's one of those like 7 out of 10s. I think the film the film is good. And I think it has a few flaws, and I think Batman 2 will be the one. That's what I think. That will be the one.
I agree with that. There's a nice thing that happens in this film, which is Robert Pattinson is sort of he's a new Batman, as in not just in this series, but like he's still learning what it means to fight and have all the gear, and to feel guilty about his parents, and to feel like he needs to save the city. So that works for me, that he's a bit of a like immature Batman, I suppose. And that's the whole point, I think.
Yeah. And he gets beat up and everything.
You're right.
He's a bit weaker sometimes. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But as you say, if there's a second film, he'll surely hit his stride in that one. So
I think a second film, which would most likely materialize some of the things that maybe were flaws on this one. I think that Commissioner Gordon is amazing. Man, he's such a good actor. Like, he's amazing on the role. Alfred as well, like, and of course Batman, like Robert Pattinson, is amazing on this film. We already were in love with him on Tenet already, and already on other films. He's been doing an amazing career. But no, I can't wait to see what the Batman 2 is, or whatever it's going to be called. I think even the Riddler also was really amazing. So it's a different type of film for sure. I think everyone should go and watch it. But my biggest, I guess what I was more upset about at the time was that everyone was just making out for this to be like a masterpiece. And I feel like it's good, but let's all calm down a bit. It's a bit, there's room for improvement. And I feel like there's I really struggle with the size of it, the long of it. And I already struggle with this with other films as well. Even on Marvel, I struggle with how long some of them are. I just feel like maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I love that 90 to 120 minute mark. I think that's the one for me.
Yeah. Having said that, give me more Paul Dano, give me more Colin Farrell, give me more Zoe Kravitz. I was all in. Thought the makeup work on Penguin for Colin was incredible. There were just so many great things to look at and enjoy. Again, for me, it's about the movie-going experience, and that was one of the best things. In that vein, the cinematography, and you mentioned Greig Fraser there, was out of this world. Yeah. It felt like a very different attempt at the dark and gritty thing we always hear with Batman. Yeah. Right? Yeah. We keep hearing that. Yeah. But here, like, it literally is gritty, right, Hugo? Literally the stuff he's putting on lenses and framing things. Yeah. And I only want to really quickly say that influence from the cinematography side is so prevalent in the visual effects side, and we'll get to that with Weta's work for the Batmobile chase, but it's also in like the matte paintings. Yeah. There is something old school and dirty, gritty, not perfect about the matte paintings that reminded me of some of the best matte paintings done in film history. And that on the big screen, to me, made the hugest influence. I would be so curious how they feel on a TV screen soon, getting the Blu-ray. But what can you say, Hugo, about the cinematography? I just thought it was something to behold.
It was like Greig Fraser, just won his first Academy Award with Dune. Did an amazing job there. Man, he's the man of darkness, really, if you think about it. Like, if you look at Rogue One, if you look at Dune, if you look at Zero Dark 30, which is one of the darkest films ever made. I mean, I remember being in the cinema and almost not seeing anything. It was just stunning. That film has a lot of flaws, but the cinematography of that film and the way they show the advancements of the troops trying to get to Osama bin Laden and the whole thing, the night vision, the darkness, it's just so well photographed, and yeah, he's the master of darkness. I really feel like, of course, he's also very famous for The Mandalorian as well, and all the advancements on the LED walls. But this thing was filmed with an ARRI LX-LF, and they've used anamorphic lenses. They've used these custom ARRI Alphas. So, well, the ARRI Alpha range is a new range from ARRI with an anamorphic of 2. But what they did here was they did what they call detuning. So basically, they've purposely screwed up, like tried to fiddle with the actual lens elements so that they would get more edge distortion. So the center is pretty sharp and pretty good. Because let's face it, like cameras these days are just way too sharp and too perfect, and lenses are also too perfect because that's the objective. The objective is to make them perfect, and then you can screw about on them. But to capture that essence of Seven and to capture that essence of Chinatown, they really detuned the lenses and making these amazing vignettes on the sides, and also like ghosting and a lot of bokehs, stuff that I spend my entire career adding to CG. Like I keep adding all this stuff on full CG trailers that I make and that I direct. Like I tried as much as I can, and I guess this is the best method. Is just to fuff around with the lens itself, and then you'll get all those things, to try to get closer to those really old school lenses that they used to have on the Panavision times,
But what's interesting is, because it is a heavy VFX show, the visual effects studios do still need to add all that stuff, Hugo. And my reaction to the matte paintings was that they are blurry at the edges. They don't look perfect, but they fit in perfectly to the style of the film.
But it's fun, because I feel like it's really strange, because anyone that has studied film for a long time, as we've done, and as a lot of people have done, you will know that this has always been like this. If you look back at films on the 60s, on the 70s, and on the 80s, we've always had these anamorphic lenses. If you look at Die Hard, if you look at all these films, always had those edges, those problems, and it's really strange, because we went through a phase in the 2000s where everything got very clinical, everything got really, really clean. And then I think it spilled a bit to the 2020s as well, where when you look at some shows, especially some blockbuster movies, they almost look like clinically shot, almost like a commercial. And now we're kind of like going backwards a bit into the world of really beautiful lenses that we had on the 80s and 90s and even on the 70s. I find this fascinating, because it's almost like people are now discovering something that has always been here. But, it's fine. That's okay. I guess it's the same with Kate Bush on Stranger Things. I guess people are now discovering Kate Bush. That's fine. Like, Kate Bush has always been around, but, she actually managed to get into the top 8 place. She's never done that on her career, which is amazing with the film. But anyway, I guess the same thing goes now with these lenses and the way that they're now filming these films. We've always had this. It's just that it's funny now. Some kind of nostalgia trip is coming back and bringing them back, which is great. I love it. Like I've always been an advocate to trying to break the image as much as I can, and I love the fact that especially Greig Fraser has been doing this on all his films. Every single one of them has this,
Yeah, and in a very similar way. Although actually, before I say that, you could say people have discovered Nirvana out of this film as well, if they didn't already know Nirvana. But anyway,
you saw on Twitter, like there was this person saying, "Oh, my kids came up to me and said, 'Oh, mom, do you know about this new band? They're called Nirvana.'" And the guy and the woman was like, "I was on one of their shows."
Amazing. The other thing that's kind of old school but now new school, of course, is Greig Fraser's pioneering LED volume work. From Mandalorian, also used in Batman, and it's his relationship with ILM Stagecraft on display here. And we're not going to go into detail about that, Hugo, but essentially, where possible, they would film the actors against these Stagecraft LED walls with real-time backgrounds of city views or, locations where ILM had already composited, basically full CG bridge environments with people moving cars, other things like that. There's definitely other users of stagecraft. And I think, because Greig has had that experience, he uses it just to make the shots work. Yeah. It's not in all of the film. Some of it, I feel like they've shot like car LED things and then not necessarily used it. Or they've shot actors and then they still rotor them off the backgrounds. It's not always this, we're capturing everything in camera. It's about using it for lighting. It's about using it to help the actors feel immersed in it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something they took advantage of here.
It is, yeah. No, it makes perfect sense because even the actors talk about this on the interviews. It makes so much better. It's so much better for them because they can see the actual city there. They can see the actual background and they get all the perfect, correct reflections on their skin. So even if you rotoscope everything, which they tend to do anyway, because they have to replace the backgrounds a lot of times and also deal with moe effect and other glitches that might happen and black levels that might happen with problematic LED screens. So, but at least if you roto it, that's fine. But at least now you have the perfect reflection and you have the correct tone on their skin, on the skins, and everything is matching. So I think on that sense, I agree with Greig Fraser that it's revolutionary for certain scenes. It especially it shows up on this film a lot, like even on small things, even when they're, obviously everyone knows about the LED walls when he's with Catwoman upstairs on the balconies, because everyone's seen the marketing material about that. But so even on smaller shots, even on when we are with Falcone's lair, you have these big windows seeing the city. Even that, a lot of those were also LEDs on the back. Some of them were blue screens. A lot of people have an idea that this film has no blue screens, but it actually has a lot of blue screen, especially on the train fight and also at the end section. It has a lot of blue screen. And even some car shots also has some blue screen. But yeah, it's funny you're saying that about the 360. The 360 thing that they shot was that they had this like array of 7 cameras of seven Audi Lexus on a car, and then they filled the traffic and they film all these shots so that they would have 360 environmental captures of these shots, and then they would track them, put them on the stagecraft, and then they could use them as a cyclorama almost around the actors when they were with the car bumping around. This is funny because there's like an entire featurette about this on Warner Bros. YouTube channel, which I will post while we're talking. You'll see some images of that. But they make it sound like they've used it on all the shots, but they ended up replacing most of them. So it's funny how sometimes these marketing pieces, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's like miscommunication somewhere, but I think at some point someone thought it was a fantastic idea, and it is a fantastic idea. But then it didn't really turn out the same way, because then when you're in editorial, when you're doing visual effects, and then you want to change things, you have to change them. So it's funny how, and then you read the comments on that YouTube video, and everyone thinks everything was done for real, but it wasn't really. We're gonna go into that in a minute, but it's a strange way.
Those videos produced by the studio often look. They're obviously just trying to take as much B-roll as possible to make it, to fill in their featurette. But I think also what happens, Hugo, as you would know, working on lots of commercials and film sets, is that you go in with a plan and the plan changes and you just use it to its full advantage. And this seems like what's been done here, not just in relation to LED walls. I think we're also talking about practical effects and what you can shoot for real as special effects. This film, Hugo, is really just like the breed of other big action films in recent times, where the filmmakers, the marketing drive behind the film is that, so much of this is practical. Now, the truth is, so much of it was. Yeah. Oh my God, the stunt work in this film is insane. The car stuff that we'll talk about is insane. The wire work is brilliant. As always, it's replaced in many or augmented in many instances.
But that's okay. Like I guess that's what I wanted to kind of say and complement what you're saying, that's okay, and that's how it should be done. If you look,
the best shot resulting.
Exactly. Like if you look at the fight scenes on the club or the fight scenes on the train station when Batman first fights these hoodlums or these robbers that are trying to rob this poor man, like all those shots, Robert Pattinson was there fighting, but of course he wasn't. Also, they also had to film. The stunt. It's called Rick English, which is amazing. I love his name. Like they had to film the stunt as well. So the amazing thing about this is that obviously when you see the B-roll, they're only going to show the B-roll of Patterson, of course, because he's the famous guy. So they're only going to show his B-roll. There's of course a lot of B-roll of the stunts as well. And the amazing thing, especially on those club scenes, and especially on the first fight scene, is that yes, he did fight, but then they glued and merged 2 or 3 plates of the 2 fights. So it's so clever, and it's such an amazing use of all these techniques of using stunts, real stuff on set, and then augmenting it with compositing and augmenting it with 3D if you need to, but mostly augmenting it with stitching, merging, blending, morphing between one performance to the other performance and then to the other performance, and really making all these punches connect, because all these shots are really long. And so when a punch doesn't connect, okay, that's fine. They roto the hand, they then extend the hand, they paint over the hand and make the hand reach the face of the other person. So it's like there's all this amazing extra work that goes on top of the amazing stunts already that just makes everything so much better. And I love this approach that they are making, and this is the approach to go. Obviously, when people outside this industry, when they watch the B-roll, they think it's all done practically. It is done practical, but there is so much compositing on top. So much.
I would say VFX savvy people, and obviously listeners and watchers of this podcast, would be completely aware of the augmentation done in fighting scenes, which relates to making punches land, but it also relates to face replacement of stunties. Hugo, you're specifically referencing stuff that was in Weta FXs amazing.
Sorry, I had to say it because as a compositor, I was blown away by what they showed there, because you never get to see this detail. You never get to see a presentation showing this level of detail of how they've pulled off those shots.
It's so good. I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to quickly mention the VFX crew on the film. Although we're concentrating on Weta here. Dan Lemon was the overall visual effects supervisor. He hails from Weta Digital. And then the principal houses were ILM, Weta FX, and Scanline. And Weta did the Batmobile chase, but also a bunch of these fight sequences and a few other really fun things. ILM did a whole bunch of sequences, obviously the stagecraft stuff. And Scanline did mostly the sort of flooding stuff in the stadium. And then, of course, a lot of fighting there as well. So they would have done augmentation that we're talking about. But in this presentation that Weta FX gave at FMX, I mean, we see the artistry and the time that simply just goes into replacing multiple different stunt doubles with Robert Pattinson's face. And, maybe because it goes by so quickly, it's sometime in rain or it's dark, people might not notice. But I think the director notices, right? And so they have to come up with ways to deal with this. And it's not what you think. It's not just all 3D face replacement from a, photogrammetry scan of Robert. It's some very clever patching and 2D work.
Yeah, it's amazing. They as they say on the presentation, they couldn't really completely, not that they couldn't afford it, it's just they didn't have any time left to actually do full CG faces. So a lot of times they've used the already made digi-double that they had of Patterson, and then what they did was they basically brought it into compositing, into projections, and they've used certain facial shots of the face. So they basically morphed between several I'm not saying it's stills. What it is, it's a static mesh.
It's angles.
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
angles. So they have a static digi-double, which of course has one facial expression, nothing else. And then what they did was they've used that as the base, and then they would fit in mouths and other parts that they could from both Patterson's performance, but also from Rick English and the other stunts on the performance stage as well. So they could mix and match. It was seamless. It's amazing, and I can't say enough with Beck Veach, the comp supervisor of this thing. She's presenting on FMX, and she's amazing. Her team was amazing. I was blown away by this. I was really blown away. And all of the team at Weta, with Anders as well as the VFX soup, I can't compliment them enough. I feel like
we really love this presentation.
No, we do. If anyone has the opportunity, they should try to watch it. And obviously, we're going to focus just on the car today because there's so much. This film has too much, Ian, and we need to do more episodes, and we need to do more episodes about this. We'll do that later once there's more breakdowns coming out and there's more information coming out. Information is scarce at the moment. We only really know of Weta's work. Nothing else has come out yet. So we're kind of slowly I guess, getting everything together. But I'm sure we'll come back to this because I really would love to talk about the LEDs. I would love to talk about the the fight sequence. I would love to talk about the Batcave. I would love to talk about the train sequence. All these sequences are just mind-blowing. There's so much on this film. Both in CG, practical LEDs, all of it, but we can't because it would have taken 3 hours for us to go through it.
Yes. All right. Well, then let's jump into the Batmobile chase, which is essentially, just to quickly give an overview, it's Batman chasing the Penguin in his Maserati. Yeah. Batman's obviously in the Batmobile. It finishes with the Penguin thinking that he's managed to cause this traffic jam and crash with a tanker explosion and thinking that the Batman has been trapped in that, possibly even perished. Of course, the Batmobile is able to jump over these trucks, causes the Maserati to spin, then approaches the Penguin in, the real trailer-defining shot, upside down, in the rain. It was a mesmerizing sequence in the trailer, let alone in the final film for me. Again, Hugo, the biggest selling point of this sequence before anyone knew how it was made was that they went out and shot it.
Yeah.
And guess what? They did.
Yeah.
But as is the case with pretty much any big car chase these days, those shoots, that shooting of the car chase was really just the starting point.
Yeah.
And then what Dan Lemon and Weta FX have been able to produce as the final result is once you realize how much CG is in there, how much visual effects work is done to augment what was shot, to add rain, to add things like Batman's cape at the end, and we'll get to that, is just as mesmerizing to me as the actual final sequence. What did you think of it?
It's one of the best car sequences in history, like in cinema, and it's really, really dark and really gritty and really terrifically shot. I would split this in really there's two really distinct parts of this for it to become this good. You have, of course, the physical side with Robert Alonso, the second unit director and also the supervisor stunt coordinator. And then, of course, Dominic Tucci, which is the special effects supervisor, and his team. They did an amazing job with driving these cars on a real environment. It was a highway. They basically used an airport, a closed airport in Dunsfold. Yeah. And they had 50 cars there, 50 vehicles with trucks and everything. They had, of course, we've talked about this before on 007. They had these cars with the pods on top where the stunt drivers could be driving it. They even had rally champion winners driving the cars. And the whole thing was just amazing. All shot in anamorphic, shot at 6K with a really low ISO, really high ISO. They shot it with 2500 ISO. So it's really noisy, really gritty. So the whole side of the film for real was amazing. And then once they finished that, they started, like, of course, editing this. And obviously they wanted to shoot it all for real. That was the objective, of course. That's always the objective. But of course, slowly, as it became more and more evident that as they were editing it, the story wasn't really coming through. You know, the idea of how the cause and effect happens on this sequence. You know, how does the car explosion, how the explosions happen, how do the trucks roll over? All these things were not really easy to film. And of course, they couldn't film in rain as well. So the rain was missing as well. So they progressively on previs and progressively on editorial started replacing shots and shots and shots. And in the end, I really love this because you have quite a lot of real shots there. And then, of course, you have a lot of full CG shots. A lot of really full CG shots that people really think they're real. Like, that's the funny thing when you look at the comments on YouTube and also the people watching the behind the scenes. Most of these really beautiful shots when the Batmobile hits the truck, and also you see it from behind with the propulsion. All these shots are actually full CG. It's just that people are sold already because they've seen so many real shots, and then Weta did such an amazing job merging and matching the real shots that you don't even notice anymore. And so it's all seamless. Like, we jump from real to not real to CG, full CG to half CG, and then full CG again, and then real shot, and then half of it CG, and then it's just flawless.
I really like something you just said then, which was that the audience is sold already. Yeah. And that is the concept of matching shot by shot, you know, matching a practical, like there's a practical shot or partial practical shot, then it has to go CG. And here's also something I want to say, Hugo, about discussion about a sequence like this, which is it isn't real or CG. Like, it's often augmented. You know, the Batmobile will be CG in this shot, but the backgrounds are real. The rain is digital, but the ground is wet because they wet it down. You know, things like that. Or, like, another example is when that Batmobile actually does land, they totally landed the real stunt car. But because it had to land with shock absorbers so the driver doesn't, you know, get a back injury or something, the car is too high. So Weta FX, you know, they use a combination of their digital asset, but also just compositing to reduce the size of the wheelbase. And so what I'm really getting at is sometimes the discourse on this stuff is it's all CG or it's all practical. It's always a mix. And I don't just mean a mix in the whole sequence. I mean a mix from shot to shot. And that's also what makes it more convincing. Because you're never really sure. In fact, you're not thinking about it when you're watching this sequence. I'm a visual effects journalist, and I'm just obsessed with the actual sequence when I'm watching it. That's why this sequence works.
It's funny you're saying that. Even small little things like the wheels. For example, when he drifts, there's a really cool shot when the car is drifting on the side. Obviously, the drift wheels have to be shorter so that you can drift better. But the Batmobile supposedly has thicker wheels. So just on that shot, for example, they shot it for real, but then they had to take away the real wheels and put CG wheels in its place. And they would have to be completely seamlessly merged and completely integrated. The whole thing is just, I really wish, I get really upset when I see this Discord on Twitter of people like bashing CG or bashing that it was all real, and really not fully understanding why it is really amazing that it's a mix of both. And I feel this Discord has happened on this film. It has happened recently on Top Gun as well. Top Gun is also the same thing. They were on the cockpit. Yes, they were, but then a lot of the environment was completely augmented on the background. So it's like this merging is what makes it perfect. And we've reached now a phase on technology. We've reached now a phase where we don't need to do it full CG. We could use the plate and then work from there. And I think this is the difference. This is what's been happening for the last 5, 6, 7 years. We've been seeing this more and more. We saw it with Nolan's films, and then it kind of like went over to blockbusters, and now we're seeing it more and more and more. And the films that win every year the Oscar are the films that really accomplish this. They accomplish a perfect mix of the practical with the CG, like Dune did, like First Man did, like this film will as well, and even James Bond. All these films that manage to merge these two things, and I feel that's the key here. And not taking away any of the work that was done on the stunt, which they were amazing, and not taking any of the work that was done on VFX. They were both stunning. That's the thing,
Yeah. And there's one extra element to it, which also doesn't get discussed as much in the kind of Twitter conversation. And that is, it's very easy to talk about the car being CG or the fireballs being simulated. But there's this extra component in this sequence and the whole film, partly because of the influence of Greig Fraser, which is Weta FX needed to match things like bokeh, the blurriness, the rain, as in what the rain would look like if Greig had shot it for real. And
not just the rain, you have the wheel spray, you have the splashes, you have the water on lenses, crowd splashes. All these things had to be all done. And it was really clever as well, the way that Weta approached this, because obviously doing particles at this level really takes a long time to render, and they get really noisy, especially when you activate motion blur. So then when you start having noise, you need to kind of progressively change, like put more and more sampling on it, and then it becomes impossible to render almost. So they developed all sorts of really cool tricks. I'll give an example. For example, for the splashes on the ground, it was really amazing the methodology that they've used. Again, as well, just like the mixture between physical and digital, there was a mixture here between simulation and compositing to do those splashes. They could have done it all in Houdini and as a simulation, but would have taken it too long. So the approach was stunning. Beck's approach was amazing, and our team, they went to Houdini and they did these 3-frame splash animations of just the splashes on several angles. They ended up just using one angle. And then they picked up these 3-frame animations of splashes of the rain dropping in the floor, and then they brought it into Nuke and made an entire particle system out of it, and then of course attached it to the camera tracking and made it so that it would only render when it's visible to the fulcrum of the camera, so that they would save memory. So even here, there's a perfect symbiosis of 3D, real 3D with real 2D merging to make this thing happen. And throughout the entire film, this is the process, even on the flares as well, the same thing. They've tried to use the flares that they had, like the CG type of custom-made things that they had, but then they discovered these caustic flares because of the water, because Greig Fraser started putting silicon in front of the lens and shit like that. So he literally started putting silicon pieces on top of the glass and they put it on front of the lens. And so you get these beautiful caustic stars that go on all of, which we sometimes see on our eyes, when it's raining and when we have a lot of water, we see that on our eyes already. And so, the CG department could have done that on all the CG, and it's funny how Weta just kind of discovered, why do we need to do this in CG? Let's just go and shoot it. And they went, and they...
and did their own splotches and gooey stuff. Yeah, exactly.
It's so cool. They went over, they shot it for real, then they shot a bunch of these elements, and then they could use the elements on bespoke art-directed pieces where they would just put in this caustic flare here. They would put in the other caustic flare and then augment the caustic flares that were already there and then add the caustic flares that were missing on the full CG shots. So it was just a symbiosis of communication. It's all about communication. And this entire thing of Greig Fraser with the CG with Lemon, with the direct, all of them just talking to each other, and everyone just on top of their game. These flare things are really the pinnacle of that, I think.
Yeah. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to give a shout out to an interview I did do with Weta FX, and that was their VFX Soup Anders Beck, the compositing soup, and Dennis, the animation soup. And I think I talked to them for about an hour about this sequence, and we had a lot of fun chatting about all the things. So there'll be a link to this article called Anatomy of a Batmobile Chase at Befores and Afters. What I enjoyed talking to them about was you could really feel like the camaraderie from the visual effects work, which was all done during COVID. Yeah. So I think essentially many of them were working from home while this was being done in post, which, I think they were so pleased to see the work up on the screen. But we had a fun chat about that. One other thing they mentioned in that article and also in this amazing presentation at FMX is the clown car.
Yeah.
Hugo. Do you want to talk about that briefly? Because that's a fun addition too.
It's so funny. Yeah, so so obviously on the full CG shots, obviously they had the practical side, which had a lot of traffic, and they had 50 vehicles. But of course, when you do the full CG shots, you have to put the vehicles back. So and they weren't going to like merge the plates. So what they did was they did full CG traffic, of several vehicles, plates that were pre-simulated with the splashes, with the spray and everything. And so for them to make the rain, because the rain has to interact on top of the cars, and the rain has to do also like hitting and collision, and some shots are full CG, but then some shots are not. And so the ones that are not, they have to motion track the cars that are there. And obviously you can't just like go and track every single car. So they've developed this really funny rig called the clown rig, which really can be deformed, and it really looks like a clown. I wish I could show you guys. It is so funny. We can't show you, but I wish I could show you. It basically is just like a cartoon car, like a Roger. Basically looks like a Looney Tunes car, just gets stretched and swooped and basically what they can do is they can deform it to fit whatever car they want, so that would become the collision for the rain and for the spray and for the vapors and all the atmospherics. And yes, it's not going to be a complete match to the car that they are trying to match, but it's rain. It doesn't matter if it doesn't match, because it's just like rain all over the place. It's a mess. It's really chaotic. So you don't even see it. It was so funny, that clown car. No, it's.
Hugo, the chase itself is just spectacular, but there is a really iconic moment that was heavily used in the trailers. Once Penguin is sort of upside down and Batman is out of his car, he's walking towards him, and the camera is actually inverted as well. And we see the silhouette of Batman. What I was stunned to learn was that for when the camera is the right way up, following Batman, Robert Pattinson wasn't wearing the right boots, or wardrobe changed during the production of the film, and also he wasn't wearing a cape, partly because it's raining. And you want sort of this superhero look. So, of course, Weta FX was able to simulate the cape. But they also did some really kind of like patching, Beck calls it like quick and dirty, I think, kind of fixes to the boots, rather than have to do CG boots. She just patched in, or the team patched in the right looking boots. So, to me, that's just such a summary of Weta FX coming up with the right solutions for the shots. Not always, taking something that would take so long, but basically making the shots work, and then basically making the work seamless. Like, no one knew that.
No.
And, these were front and center shots in the trailers.
At the time when that shot with the fireball and the cape and he was walking inverted, everyone on Twitter was like, oh, look at this. It's all real. It's amazing. Oh, my God. It's all real. Yeah. It's all real.
I think I even read that Matt Reeves, found that shot in previs by doing some kind of VR, perhaps, or iPad level previs, by sort of having an environment to look around in and just to come up with great shot design. So it sort of epitomizes where we're at with this virtual production approach. and then VFX doing a stellar job in post.
For me,
love it.
Everything is impressive on this shot. Of course, we can't talk about everything. There's like simulations, there's CG, there's full car replacements. The entire Batmobile on some shots is full CG. It has these beautiful sheen of water and droplets and everything. The whole thing is just stunning. But I wanted to just do a final shout out for one thing that I was truly impressed, and I think is why this film looks so good in terms of VFX. And that is the lens work, the digital lens work, the bokeh you've mentioned briefly, but the methodology of doing this bokeh. Because one thing that happens right now is that when you want to do bokeh effects, which, for the audience that doesn't know, the bokeh comes from the shape of the iris, of the aperture of the lens, of the f-stop. So a lot of times you just use these plugins. You would use PG Bokeh or use Z Defocus in Nuke, or you would use any other plugin that you want, or FitchLove. You would use all these plugins, and they tend to allow you to bring in a kernel from a bokeh that you photographed before, and then you can use this kernel, and then the kernel would be the shape of the bokeh. The problem with this is that it just makes the bokeh the same on the entire shot. So the bokeh looks the same on the middle, looks the same on the side, looks the same on the corner. And so I think this is one of the reasons why this entire thing looks so seamless, is because the bokehs were done. They did it in simulation. They did it inside of Nuke and using deep compositing, but they've made a custom tool so that the bokeh would literally change if it was on the center of the screen, or if it was on the side of the screen, or if it was on the corner. Not only change a shape and the formation and blurriness, but also change the dirt pattern inside of it. And so this entire thing, they have a beautiful test on the FMX presentation where they show the entire Batmobile in CG, and then they show the different f-stops showing, I'm guessing that was a test to show Greig Fraser they could do it, I guess. And that's why it matches so beautifully with what Greig Fraser did on camera. It's because they did not make any compromises. They made the bokehs exactly like they were for real, with no compromises. Yeah. And I think the mixture of bokeh, vignetting, edge blurriness, chromatic aberration, that kind of like smudging on the sides of the lens, all that extra processing on top of the full CG shots, that's why it sold the shots. I think I really wanted to do a shout out on that, because the methodology of doing these bokehs was really smart, and I have to hand it over to Beck and her team. It was really, really well done. Yeah.
Totally agree. And yes, we could spend hours just reciting everything out of that Weta presentation. In this, just generally, as I say, I watched it like an action sequence, not a visual effects sequence. And I know that doesn't sound like a big difference, but it did feel like that. Also, I could tell when I watched this for the first time, but then when I talked to the team at Weta FX, I could also tell that there was such a great dialogue between Matt Reeves, editorial, and Dan Lemon, and then the Weta FX team, in fine-tuning this sequence to make the best shots possible. Now, an example of that is where apparently, the Penguin is, Colin Farrell is laughing about Batman seemingly not escaping the fireball. And apparently his performance was so good that it sort of continued for a while, but the fireball and what they had shot behind him didn't. Weta FX can pick up the slack there, and they can fill in the rest with, their visual effects work. And, it's really a comfortableness, I think, that Weta has and Dan Lemon has with Matt Reeves that allows that kind of thing to happen. And oh my God, it's just so effective to be done through the rear view mirrors and, the side angles and the way they shot it was just beautiful for that part.
Yeah, it show. I know we keep repeating, but it does show how these shots progress. They filmed it for real, like you said. He did an amazing performance. They do have a truck burning on the back, and they do have a truck that topples down. It was supposed to be a shot on camera, most of it, But yeah, he keeps laughing, and then the truck fire is gone, so it's not even there. So yeah, so it's really amazing where they've basically ended up replacing the right side of the screen with a completely new CG road, a lot of new trucks falling down, and then more and more fire. Some of the fire was simulation, some of the fire was even stock footage that they've brought in from their stock library that they've merged because it was so defocused it wasn't going to be a problem. Then of course they had to do the full rotomation of the car itself, because the car where Colin Farrell had to have the reflections of the new explosions, so they had to do that as well. So they basically used the left side of the real plate, and then the right side is all full CG. And again, this is why this works so well. The director found something new during shooting. Something happened on set that was not planned. The performance was better than they expected. The shot lingered for longer, and instead of cutting it, instead of just leaving it as it is, they went the extra mile. They saw, okay, what can we do in CG to help this shot and to make it even better? And then they just they put everything on it, and it just looks even better. I feel I'm so glad you've mentioned that shot. I think that shot is the absolute I guess example that goes through this entire film, on all these shots. Yeah. That's the methodology. They shot something that was as best as they could. They then found new things on editorial. Then they augmented it, made it even better, and then they still kept tweaking and tweaking until they got to exactly what they wanted. It's a combination of the practical, of the visual effects, of the LED screens, everything merged into one. I love it. I think it's really fascinating,
Yeah, absolutely great. Hugo, I reckon a final shout out is deserved to the production designer. That's James Chinland, for everything in the film, but particularly this Batmobile sequence. And also concept artist Ash Thorpe, who I believe was largely responsible for the design of the Batmobile. One of the coolest things is on Ash's website is he basically has these designs, great photos of them, plus his wireframe models. Yep. I mean, you've got to go there. It is so cool. You don't usually get that kind of behind the scenes from the concept designer. So I'd really recommend that. The Batmobile just looked super cool, right? Yeah, that's what I think. And it had the best sound of a super duper car as well.
Yeah. The Batmobile's always looked good, like all of them, from even Tim Burton's Batmobile looks awesome. And of course the Tumbler on Christopher Nolan's. But this one is like a muscle car. It's like a US muscle car. Yeah. It's fantastic. It's really, really strong. And it's so funny. There's when it first shows up on the film, we spend 30 seconds just hearing the ribs. It's like,
that's right.
It's almost like a creature that is showing up from the cave. It's so good.
I agree.
It's so cool.
I love it. Well, I'm glad we could mention that. And I'm glad we could sort of go in depth a little bit on Weta FXs' work there. Just super cool. Again, thank you to them and FMX for making this presentation possible that we saw. That was awesome. But Hugo, that's been really fun talking about.
I'm sure we're gonna come back to this film, because I think there's, especially the LED stuff, and especially the some shots at the end as well from Scanline.
I just want to finish by doing my best impression of Robert Pattinson, and guess what? You have to as well, Hugo. Are you ready? Are you ready? I'm vengeance. How was that?
That was good. That was really good.
Now you have to do it.
I'm vengeance. No, I can't do it. I can't do his voice. Here's the funny thing. That's the first time he says his name on the film. So what if everyone thought he was called Vengeance? What about next day, the newspaper comes out, Vengeance strikes again. And he was like, I'm called the Batman. I'm not called Vengeance. And then it sticks forever. And he's called Vengeance forever. Everyone knows him as Vengeance. It's his own fault.
Well, if Warner Brothers needs either of us to do the voiceover work with that name, we're available. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening. Thanks, Hugo. Really appreciate it.
See you. Bye.